last confession. Well, I confess my sins every day to the Lord. That would be.
Wow, that's pretty good. That's better than I do.
Well, I try to anyway. At least when I pray. So anyway, I regret voting for current President Trump because although he's done some stuff for pro-life, which I appreciate. That's my usual focus in politics is pro-life uber alles. It hadn't been that much this time. In fact, we still have the abortion drug crossing state lines, and we have more abortions now than we did a couple of years ago. So
you don't have to bring facts into it.
Yeah, well, facts are the thing. Yeah, that's right. But he has a strong motivation for his vision for this country's greatness, but he's blurred into the ends justify the means, which I don't agree with, and it's been especially apparent this past year or so. Starting with the ICE raids, the Bible's chock full of treating the strangers correctly, and the aliens. It probably supports building a wall like Nehemiah did, but once strangers in there, you ought to treat them fairly, and in the process of emptying out all the illegal immigrants, which is I think very impractical and probably immoral since they've sunk their roots here. He's violated the Fourth Amendment for search and seizure without a warrant. He's whether he knows it or not, ICE agents are posted outside churches sometimes, to grab people. And, of course, I work in a clinic, and most of them. I don't. After 75 years in Houston, I have to have a translator because they're all Hispanic. Probably a certain percentage of them are here without documentation, called illegal aliens, but. They're hard workers. And, one lady makes 1,000 tortillas a day, and I told her, "Hey, you better rotate your job, or else you're going to get." She was complaining for her elbow, got tennis elbow, and from playing tennis, but it's flipping 1,000 tortillas a day. And so I said, "Well, you better rotate your job." And so, I know they're hard workers, and 90% of them, 95, 99, who knows? So so there's a bad precedent of violating the Constitution for that. So the next thing is the pushing artificial intelligence, because China's doing it. You got to get ahead of China, but in the meantime, we're increasing mass surveillance, and kids are getting exposed to all sorts of algorithms, and there's he wants to supersede state restrictions on it. Like he has a feud with DeSantis. DeSantis wants to restrict those. So I think that's a fool's errand. I don't think not by might or by strength, but by my spirit, says the Lord. So I don't think that. Robot's going to take over the world, but because God says He's a God of the living and not of the dead, and therefore not of robots. So He'll intervene ahead of time. But all the big tech guys think there's a big possibility of robots taking over the world. Musk and a bunch of other ones. And the AI guys are kind of regretting what they're doing. So the other thing is. Foreign policy, I agree with his tariffs, but I don't agree with any of these military interventions. Back in 1648, at the end of the 30-Year War, there's this thing called the Westphalia, Peace of Westphalia, where all these princes came together and said, "Hey, we're not going to invade each other." And let's see. Each state has its sovereignty over its own territory, and each state is equal under the international law. So um, it never goes well when you invade somebody that hadn't invaded you. It applies to China wanting to invade Taiwan, or us invading Iraq. Back in 2003. It just never goes well. Practically speaking, they're on their home turf, so you're going to get a lot of guerrilla warfare, and you never get anywhere. And
Not to mention punishing someone for something they haven't done yet.
well, yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah, you're punching. And there was a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Iran negotiated several months ago, and so you're breaking that. So. Uh, I know they're enriching uranium and everything, but still they hadn't done anything, and that's a bad precedent. And so, it's probably going to lead to a lot of loss of life. They say, well, they're at their weakest. The people are against them, but nothing rallies with people like a foreign invasion. So you're gonna. So anyway. For those reasons, I'm regretting, voting for him last time. That was 2024. So anyway, in fact, and also he's sowing discord among the brethren. One of the 7 deadly sins in Proverbs 6:19. And so because he has a words, everybody says, well, it's just Trump, he's acting that way, saying all sorts of bad things about everybody. But it's a bad atmosphere to start, and, starts everybody, it radicalizes everyone, makes the left mad, makes the right mad, and, there's nobody in the middle. Hadn't heard my esteemed colleague. I disagree with my esteemed colleague for a long time. I haven't heard that anywhere, So, that's he's kind of normalized that. I mean, other people have done that too. President Obama did it some. Kind of not respecting the other side too much. He said. But much smaller scale than President Trump. He has no respect for the other side, and I think that's bad. So you gotta assume that everybody has good reasons and is basically wants the welfare for mankind. Even if you disagree with the way they do it, and so I think that's that once you get that civility out of discourse, then it's hard to bring it back. And even though you say, oh, that's just Trump and it's a one-shot deal, but it influences other people that way. So let's see what else. But still pray for him, because 1 Timothy 2:2 says, pray for your leaders that will have peace and that the gospel will be spread. So I pray for President Trump. I hope that he's saved. I'm not sure. Even though he aligns himself with a lot of Christians, still doesn't, just because you go to church doesn't mean you're a Christian necessarily. So pray for him, for his salvation, for guidance, even at this time, that he'll do prudent things. Pray for the Speaker of the House, the Minority Leader, Senate Majority Leader, Senate Minority Leader. And we should pray for everybody. So, from a personal standpoint, I think I've been kind of a political junkie, and probably diverted some mental resources and other resources, I guess, to things that could have been used for furthering the gospel. I think. We just need to make sure everyone's saved. That's the main thing, and so it's kind of a last year, and especially the past week, has been a time of pruning. In John 15, too. You know, he prunes you. You know, it's not not pleasant, but you know, I think you need to be pruned to you know, further the gospel. And so I think, you know, we need to pray for the Iranian people and limit the loss of life. Pray for the troops; they won't limit their loss of life. Pray for the Israelis. You know, pray for everyone. I mean, pray for all these Chinese people. You know, golly. My concern is, you know, a bunch of people are dying every day without knowing the gospel, and you know, that's not good. You know, so anything that furthers the gospel, we should be for, and anything that hinders it, we should be against. And so, therefore, you know, I don't think it's always a temptation when you're in power to do stuff you ought not to do. You know, that's why we have a two-party system, and you know, constitutional limits on things, keep things from getting out of hand, and so you know, that's you know, God gives us, you know, limits. God has the hearts of the rulers in His hands, and you know, in our system of government, He has limits on one side versus another, keep the other side from getting too out of hand. And so, you know, God works that way through us. I used to be an anarchist, so I didn't think the government had the moral authority to do anything. But you know, Romans 13 says let everyone be subject to higher powers, and so you know, we need to you know, limit what the rulers too, you know, through constitutional restraints, and you know, so from now on, I'm focusing more on you know, whatever I have, whatever God has left for me is furthering the gospel, or try to. You know, what I got.
Well, thanks, Doc.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.